is Kathy Moore. Kathy is what I call a Lost Lit veteran. She started taking my workshops back in 2014, and we've been together ever since. I've always loved hearing her writing, and she's very generous with her feedback. So here is her official bio. Kathy Moore is a teacher of English as a second language at a public elementary school in Brooklyn. She also teaches in the continuing education department at Hunter College. She holds an MA in TESOL from Hunter College and has a BA in French literature from Cornell University. She is indebted to Lost Lit for providing inspiration, support, and snacks on many Wednesday nights. She dedicates tonight's reading to her daughter, Miranda. Let's hear it for Kathy.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. This is called My Mother's Bud Vase, and it is about events that happened a little over 20 years ago. I can't remember now who gave us those cups and plates, my father says. We're standing in the dining room of my parents' house in Brooklyn. Your mother loved those, he adds, looking across the room at me. My older brother Rick and I are standing by 2 rows of open shelves filled with my mother's favorite things. The white plates from Japan, the deep black enamel bowl with the white interior, where one of the kittens we had liked to sleep, and the crystal bud vase. Rick leans toward me and whispers, Nancy and I gave her those cups and dessert plates, but don't say anything because Linda won't like it. Nancy was Rick's first wife, and Linda is his second. He looks around to make sure Linda isn't listening, but she's too busy surveying everything that has to be packed and shipped to Berkeley or donated to Goodwill. She is strategizing with my father about what he should keep for the apartment he's moving to in Strawberry Creek Lodge, a senior residence near her and Rick in Berkeley. After my mother died, he said he couldn't bear to stay in Brooklyn by himself. I'd like to have the crystal bud vase, I say, pointing to it on the second shelf. In the summers, my mother would clip a red rose that was newly opened from the rose bush in the backyard and display it in the bud vase on the dining room table. Her roses were beautiful, but they had sharp, pointed thorns on the stems. I remember standing next to her in the backyard and trying to hold one and pricking my fingers. I looked at the thorns and felt like there was something wrong. I wished my mother knew how to grow roses without thorns. As I take the vase down from the second shelf, I hear my mother reminding me that it's heavy and to lift it carefully. I hand the vase to Linda, who starts wrapping it in newspaper. You'll want it well protected for the subway ride home, she says. Linda is the dean of a community college, and I'm glad she's here because she's good at planning and organizing, which I'm not. Linda even looks organized, with her short dark hair parted neatly on the side and black framed glasses. She's wearing a khaki skirt and a lilac short-sleeved polo shirt. She looks collected, even though it's sweltering in our house because it's August and my father hates air conditioning. I look down at my gray linen trousers and my simple but expensive cream-colored t-shirt to reassure myself that I look collected too, and stylish. In the past month, I'd bought a closet full of new clothes because looking put together helped me believe that maybe I could maintain control, when inside I felt bereft. Linda walks over and puts her arm around me. She says, Kathy, you know, your mother and I had a special relationship. She was so beautiful, and not enough notice was taken of her. I lean my head on Linda's shoulder. Linda loved my mother, maybe more than anyone else in our family, except me. Rick loved my mother, sort of, but then she wasn't his mother. His mother was my father's first wife. My mother was his third wife, which is why I'm 33 and Rick's 53. Later, when Linda has assigned Rick and me to wrap plates and bowls in newspaper in the kitchen, he says to me, Don't worry about Dad. There are plenty of single women at Strawberry Creek Lodge who will bring him food and want to spend time with him. I think to myself, Jesus, my mother just died 3 months ago and you're talking about Dad meeting women? You're a psychologist. Why aren't you more empathetic? But I don't say any of that. I just look at him and raise my eyebrows slightly. He doesn't get it, and I realize that's what he would worry about if Linda died. Rick's one of those guys who always had a girlfriend. It's not that he's incredibly handsome. He is tall and slender with dark hair, but he has a unibrow. And when he smiles, you can see that his front teeth grew in different directions and now overlap awkwardly. Rick likes to say that his teeth are good individually, but that the group dynamics are difficult. I remember so many of his girlfriends, Mary, Rita, Joan, Sarah, but he never stayed with anyone for very long until Linda. 2 nights later, it's 10:30 p.m. and the phone rings in my East Village apartment. It's my father, I mouth silently across the room to my husband, Paul, who reaches for the remote to turn the TV down. I'm sorry to call so late, but I feel so badly about having to get rid of your mother's things. I just can't take everything to California. Are you sure you don't want to put them in storage? No, we already talked about this, and anyway, she would be the first person to say, it's just stuff, let it go. That's right, she would say that, wouldn't she, he says, and he suddenly sounds uplifted. As much as she loved the black and white enamel bowl and the dessert plates from Rick and Nancy, I can hear her saying, it's okay if you can't keep them, they're just things. My mother contained so many contradictions. She was an English teacher, and I guess that's why I'm a teacher too. Although my favorite book is Pride and Prejudice, whereas her favorite books were The Great Gatsby and Moby Dick. But for all my mother's smarts, she married my father, who, when he was drunk, hit her. He wasn't drunk often, maybe once or twice a year. But when I was 12, I asked her about the black and blue marks on her arm, and she said he didn't mean it. She was 15 years younger than he was, and she protected him and took care of him until she couldn't because of the cancer. After we hang up, Paul says, I don't understand how you can be so kind to him. It's what my mother would have wanted, I answer. It's October now, 2 months later and 5 months since my mother died. I can see orange and yellow leaves on the tree outside the front window of the apartment where Paul and I live on East 10th Street. Rick is in New York attending a conference at Columbia, and I've invited him for brunch. Raspberry pancakes and real bacon, which we both love, but try not to eat too often. We're sitting at the table finishing our coffee, while Paul is in the kitchen washing the dishes. I need to tell you about Becky, Rick says, as he wraps his hand tightly around his mug. Becky is the daughter of Rick's first wife, Nancy, and Rick's stepdaughter, his only child, really. After a pause, Rick says, Becky had started seeing this guy Tex a year ago. He sells drugs, and he was arrested for stealing a car, but he got off with probation. I'm slightly confused. It's hard for me to imagine a guy in Berkeley called Tex. Rick then says, I wanted Becky to stay away from Tex, but she's 18 and thinks she knows everything. Nancy thought it would be better to let things be, that Becky would move on eventually. And anyway, Linda doesn't like me to be too involved with my ex-wife, so I tried to stay out of it. I think about Nancy, who had this ethereal look with soft brown hair that curled around her face. Her wide blue eyes always seemed to be looking directly at you, but I was never sure how much she really saw. The first time I met Nancy, we were in the kitchen, and she was pureeing mushroom soup in the Cuisinart and telling me about her step aerobics class, when Becky, who was 10, barged in and thrust a notebook down on the kitchen table. Mom, I need help with math, she had said. Not now, honey. Can't you see I'm talking to Kathy? Nancy pushed the notebook back at her. I take a sip of my coffee as Rick says, Becky got a baby. He says it so softly, I can barely hear him. I'm stunned. I can't believe my New York Review of Books reading, PhD from Columbia psychologist brother, has just said, Becky got a baby. Then I realize he's crying. I look at the red rose in my mother's bud vase, which is sitting on a side table in a corner of the room. Earlier that day, I had bought a bunch of red roses at the corner bodega. I only wanted one for the vase, so I gave the others to an elderly woman down the hall. Please, God, I think, when I become a mother, let me be a good one.